Hey, everyone, and welcome into 32 Beat Writers Beyond the Beat. We are just getting into training camp, and what better way to look into it than with our insider guy from the Raiders, Vinny Bonsignore. I think I did it.
We're off to a good start.
Awesome. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are briefly talking about this before the show. There's not a ton of Raiders information out there always floating around, so we are very excited to dive into this. We're about to start training camp. When do the Raiders exactly dive into everything?
Wednesday, July 23rd is their first practice. The veterans report tomorrow, which is we're taping this on Monday. So Tuesday is when the veterans report. We'll talk to Pete Carroll tomorrow to kick it all off, and the train is getting ready to leave the station on the 23rd, and it doesn't slow down for anybody, and we like it like that.
No, that's awesome. I mean, you guys have a lot to be excited about. Just exciting rookies, Bowers returning, new coach, new QB. It's awesome. We're gonna dive into all of that.
Yeah.
So let's just go for it. So right off the bat, let's start with the quarterback. Obviously, they go out, trade for Geno Smith, reuniting him with Pete Carroll, which I think everyone was just like, oh, makes sense. From that connection, from what we expect the Raiders offense to look like, how do we see Geno Smith fitting into this, and what do you expect from him this year?
Yeah, I was literally sitting in this studio on a Friday morning in March, on the eve of free agency, and I get a text, and it's somebody in the NFL, and said, hey, keep an eye on Geno Smith. He's going to get traded to the Raiders. It's going to happen this weekend. And I was like, whoa, what? And I remember initially thinking, is that really an upgrade? Does that move the needle? It's so interesting about Geno Smith, because I think for some reason people have slept on him, and I'll raise my hand as high as anybody. I did. And so I was like, the response was, yeah, actually it will. It makes a lot of sense. And so I started looking at the numbers and watching the videos, and lo and behold, Geno Smith's been a pretty darn good quarterback for the last 3 years in the NFL. Really one of the best, if you're being honest. And so when you insert that, what he's done over the last 3 years, it's not one of those situations where, a couple of years ago when they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo, man, if he could do what he did a couple of years ago, or, if he could be healthy, if they could recapture that, they'll be on to something. With Geno, just do what you did last year, basically. And if he does that, it's a massive upgrade here with the Raiders. And there's also reasons to think, playing behind a potentially better offensive line than he had in Seattle, a better running back in Ashton Jeanty. We'll see about that. Maybe should be a better offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. There's reasons to think that there's still some ceiling there from last year to this year. And if he can actually raise his level of play, then it helps all the more. And I guess from a starting point for this Raiders offseason and going into the season now, improving the way they did at quarterback, it makes all the difference in the world. We'll see if it actually does on the football field, but as we sit here right now on the eve of training camp, it does make all the difference in the world. Because to be honest with you, last year this time, after watching Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell in OTAs and mini camp, and then a week or so into training camp, you just realize this is going to be a struggle for the Raiders to score points. That blatant of a weakness, and I definitely didn't get that feeling watching Geno in OTAs and minicamp. It felt so much better for the Raiders. It has to happen on the field, obviously, but as we sit here today, it feels like a significant improvement at quarterback.
No, for sure. I mean, I think the Chip Kelly offensive coordinator thing's interesting too. I'm personally very curious to see how he takes Geno's skill set and what he does with that. I mean, what do you expect from Chip Kelly that maybe we didn't see last year with the Raiders?
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have on that? I think a purpose, a conviction, number one, starting with that, a real philosophy. And obviously it helps to have better players. Like, I don't know that people necessarily know this, but Chip Kelly was in the running to be the offensive coordinator here last year. And I'm sure if you talk to Antonio Pierce now, who made that call, he probably regrets, bringing in Luke Getsy as opposed to Chip Kelly. But I would argue this as well. Okay, how much of a difference would Chip Kelly have made with the offense that was here last year? No Josh Jacobs, a bad quarterback room. Could he have made a difference with those quarterbacks? I guess potentially, but it almost feels better from his perspective that he waited a year and come to a much better situation. And when you do talk about Chip and Geno and Ashton now, and a year of Brock Bowers, it feels like there's more firepower here, and it feels like the right person calling the shots is here now with Chip Kelly. I think that's one of the more curious and fascinating aspects of all this, and we're going to get a glimpse of it here in training camp, is how does Chip Kelly bring all of this together? Jacoby Myers as well, Michael Mayer, who I think has been, grossly underused in his couple of years here with the Raiders. I think the Raiders are high on tapping into him. So a lot has changed, and we talked about Geno Smith, but now you add the Chip Kelly factor. It feels like, things will be a lot better, a lot smoother, and a lot more efficient offensively. And I think if you're asking what he brings, probably efficiency, a better plan, a better idea of how to utilize and bring all this talent together.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think, segueing into that, I think the biggest splash, obviously, in the draft was Jeanty, without a doubt, right? Like, what a way to boost your offense, especially after getting Bowers the year before. I think I was just going to say, I think absolutely. The only thing we heard really so far was about Jeanty's stance. You know what I mean? So outside of that, like, what's a successful year like for Jeanty? What are your feelings on him in general?
Well, here in Las Vegas, we got a pretty good dose of Ashton Jeanty. My son goes to UNLV, so
cool.
Got a chance to watch him live probably three times over the last, maybe four actually, over the last couple of years. And the dude is legit, and it's interesting talking to Pete Carroll about Ashton Jeanty. Not to age Pete, he is 73 years old, but to really put that in perspective, Pete Carroll was on a staff in Minnesota where Bud Grant was the head coach. All right. So I don't say that to point out how old he is, because he gives everyone a run for their money in terms of the energy. But I do say that to put in perspective who he's coached against, who he's coached over the years. He's seen all the great ones since the 1970s, basically. And so when you ask Pete Carroll about Ashton Jeanty, you can see the light bulb in his head go off, and he's like, he goes as close as he possibly can to start bringing up some names that are right there in his head of the greats that he's seen. But then he stops short because I think he feels like, I'm not going to put that much pressure on him. But if I were to get into Pete Carroll's head, I would absolutely talk about Marshall Faulk. I would absolutely talk about a LaDainian Tomlinson. A Barry Sanders, a little bit of a mix of a Barry Sanders or Marshawn Lynch. And that's not hyperbole. I've been around a long time too. And there's certain things that you see of certain running backs. I don't care what level they played at. Marshall Faulk played in the same conference, basically, that Ashton did. And it didn't stop him from doing what he did. So I think the Raiders have a potentially generational talent in Ashton Jeanty. And I think he's going to make a pretty big difference here. Now, the question becomes, maybe you write him in for 1,300 yards as a rookie, and maybe 400 to 500 yards receiving, so close to 1,800 yards in total yards from scrimmage, which would be a fabulous year without question for Ashton Jeanty. I guess the biggest question becomes, what does that practically mean in terms of team success? Because we've seen running backs have great years. Just go back a few years ago. Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing. He was the best running back in the NFL in 2022. What did that really mean for the Raiders? Nothing, actually. They were a bad team. They won, I think, 6 games that year, and the next year he was gone and the coach was fired, and the rest is history. So I guess that's my biggest question. I don't think I have any concerns that Ashton, if he stays healthy, is going to produce. What does that mean for the Raiders offense? What does that mean for their team success?
No, I mean, I think there's no one in existence that's not excited about this kid. Obviously we got to watch him at Boise State for a decent amount of time, and we know the volume that he was handling regularly. And, to your point, I think if that translates, we're in for some really exciting times. And I think, we're going to segue here a little, but, looking at kind of how last year shook out in the running back room, it got a little, not ugly, but I think the biggest.
It was ugly. It was downright. It was ugly, and it was bad. It was the worst running game in the NFL by every metric. So,
I mean, personally, I fell in love with Sincere McCormick, but maybe that was just, a
Yeah.
one-off scenario. But you guys did bring in Mostert, which is, for being his age, we've always talked about he doesn't have a ton of tread on his tires, but he needs to stay healthy to be impactful. You still have McCormick in there. You still have Zamir White in there, which seemed like he was penciled in to be the starting running back less than a year ago. And you still have Camp Donovan and some guy that we kept our eye on all summer last year and Dylan Lobby. So I'm curious to see how these guys just round out the running back room, because with Jeanty, you got to imagine he's going to dominate the snaps. How do these other guys factor in, if at all, and where do you see them playing a role, if any, on this team?
Yeah, the if any part of it is pretty big. I think some of those guys that you just named are really going to have to show that they're good special teams players to earn their keep. Because you're right, you don't draft Ashton Jeanty 6th overall without the clear cut objective and really need to justify that pick, other than using him a lot. And so I would imagine, if you're looking at 17-ish carries per game, so between 17 and 19 carries per game, that equals out to close to 300 carries per game. That's a lot, but I think that would probably be part of the plan. And if he averages 4-point-some odd yards per carry, there's your 1,300 yards if he stays healthy over 17 games. What we saw in OTAs and minicamp, if you go back to Jeanty's, not last year but the year before, Boise State threw the ball to him quite a bit. It wasn't as big a part of their offense last year. It didn't really need to be, but he's got that in his arsenal. We saw in OTAs and minicamp, they were throwing it to him on screen passes and dump offs, but they were also throwing it to him downfield. And he looked pretty comfortable and good in doing that. So that becomes another factor, because typically with a young running back, all right, you're going to run him a lot, but what is he, how much is he going to mean in the pass game? Does he come off the field in those situations? Well, I have a feeling they're going to want to keep him on the field because he's such a weapon in that regard as well, which further establishes your point of what are the roles going to be behind him. I think Raheem is kind of the perfect guy to have behind him. If Jeanty if something were to happen, you feel comfortable about putting Raheem in there in any given situation. If he has to start and carry the load for a couple of games, a guy that could give him some rest during games. But then after that, I'm not quite sure why would you want to take either of those guys off the field, especially Jeanty, for anybody else. So those roles, it's going to be really interesting to see what those roles are. But again, my recommendation to Dylan Lowby and to Zamir White and to Sincere McCormick is bring your special teams cleats, because that's going to be one way you're going to be able to differentiate yourself between other guys, because it might not happen actually on the field in regular offense.
No, that makes perfect sense. All right, let's take a quick little break here, and then we're going to dive back in with some wide receivers.
You asked, we delivered a full best ball tournament on Fast Draft, but we do it the Fast Draft way, and it's called the Rabbit, because of course it is. 20-second time clock, 15 rounds. These drafts, they take 20 minutes. That's it. So you get a lot of new people coming in and playing, get a lot of best ball bros playing, exploitable ADPs, no rake. It is the best EV in all of fantasy. You should just go to fastdraft.app, use code FAST. You get a $50 deposit match. These things are a blast, and it's the best use of your funds in all of fantasy.
All right, let's dive right back in. Like I said, to some wide receivers. So Jacoby Myers, as a Patriots fan myself, pained me to see him leave, but I love that he got his first 1,000-yard season last year. I think that was one of my favorite signings in general. I was glad he got to go to a team where he might actually get utilized a little bit more. But outside of that, you got the two rookies coming in. I think that's insanely interesting. Thornton's put up some, at least gotten enough play to put up some publicity in the offseason, more so than Jack currently, I would say. And that's why I'm really curious to get your take on, what is your view of these rookies? What do you see needing to happen through camp for them to establish themselves? And then in an ideal world, what does this wide receiver room look like for the Raiders?
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss, and I know we're going to get to number 89 over there, Brock Bowers, but he's the wide receiver one. I know that he plays tight end, but that's definitely how the Raiders look at it, and rightfully so. And Jacoby Myers is really an ideal number 2 wide receiver. Had a really good rookie year last year, and both of those guys did that with quarterback play that was bottom of the league basically. So there's Geno Smith. What does he mean for either of those two players? We'll see about all that. But it's a valid question behind Jacoby Myers. You've got Trey Tucker, 47 catches last year, close to 600 yards or so. Again, putting in perspective that the level of quarterback play wasn't doing him any favors either. But then you're talking about Jack Bech and Dante Thornton. Those are the 2 rookies. And it's interesting because I think Dante was a little bit better and more polished than advertised coming out of Tennessee. There were a lot of questions about, his route running and just his overall understanding of the wide receiver position based on what he was asked or not asked to do at Tennessee, playing in kind of a funky offense. And Dante looked good during OTAs and minicamp. But as somebody that was there, I felt like that got carried a little bit too far, a little bit from outsiders who were trying to interpret, I guess, what we were reporting. It wasn't like he was out there being Randy Moss, or Jerry Rice. He was further along than I think we thought he was, which is a really good thing. But it'll be interesting to see how he's actually used, because while we were there, if you're looking at the down and distances, they played Dante a lot situationally in the red zone, certain downs and distances. And he played well. How does that translate now into a regular offense, in a game plan? When you're starting your drive at the 25-yard line or wherever and moving down the field. And yes, Jack Bech, I guess if you were to add it all up, probably didn't have as many moments as Dante, especially with the starters. He was pretty consistently with the second team offense. Why? Well, he plays basically the same position as Jacoby Myers. So, that as you're looking at first team offenses, Jacoby was generally the guy at that position. But I think as the year goes on, I think that Jack Bech is going to be that young wide receiver, even though I think Dante's going to probably surprise some people, I would put it. I think if you were to, at the end of the year, look back and see who got more touches, who got more targets, and who was more productive, I think I would lean more toward Jack Bech. I think he's going to show the Raiders that he's more than just a slot receiver. You can line him up all over the field. He's a really willing and able blocker. I think that's going to get him on the field. And I think that he's a guy, if you look at what he did in college, there's a reliability factor to him that I think Geno Smith it's going to ingratiate himself with a Geno Smith. He's going to know that when he throws it to Jack's generally gonna catch it, because if you look at the statistics, the drop, the drops in college, it was almost non-existent. So I think as the year goes on, Jack is going to be that de facto number 3 guy. But I will say this, I think a lot of what the wide receivers are going to look like behind Jacoby Myers, some of it, especially early on in the season, might be dictated by what the down and distance is, where they are on the football field. Is it the red zone? Is it at the 50-yard line? So I think it's going to be a group effort, in terms of that. So you might see a bunch of different players, I guess is what I'm saying, depending on what the situation is. And I would throw Trey Tucker in there as well. But at the end of the year, I think Jack Bech is going to be that rookie wide receiver that has the most catches and the most yards.
No, that's some great insight. I mean, that's something, and that's why we love having, the beat writers on. You guys see the stuff that gets through the cracks, and that, I think from a fantasy side of things, we all got so engulfed with Thornton because we saw, to your point, he made plays, and that's from, 30,000 feet. That's what we go off of. But to hear, that insight from you, I mean, that's awesome. And that makes things really interesting. And, shame on me for leaving Trey Tucker off the show sheet. I mean, he's a guy who's stuck around. Let's just touch base real quick. I mean, what is the ideal role for Trey Tucker since we do have these 2 rookie wide receivers kind of pressing him, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a good problem to have, and I think Trey understands, that he's got to continue to move forward and move in the right direction to hold on to his reps and his opportunities, because when you look at what he brings to the table, it's speed, and that's what Dante Thornton brings to the table as well. the difference is Dante Thornton is 6'5", and Trey Tucker is a shade under 6 foot or so. So that's an advantage Dante, so to speak.
Sure.
But I do think that I do think that there's enough room for a Trey Tucker and to be a guy that stretches the field. I'm sure you're going to probably see in situations Dante and Trey out there putting a lot of pressure on defenses by challenging them down the field. And that could also open up things out for other players. And sometimes, given the situation, both of those players might be decoys, guys that just take focus away from others as downfield threats, and then you're able to feed a Michael Mayer or a Brock Bowers or a Jacoby Myers or a Jack Besh underneath, finding room to work underneath all that. But I do think that there's a future for Trey Tucker. It will be interesting to me to see how advanced Dante Thornton is and how much that cuts into a Trey Tucker.
No, again, great insight on that. It sounds like the Raiders wide receiver room is going to be a very interesting part of training camp here with all these moving parts, and that's something to look forward to for us. Now, I know that
Tommy Millott too. Tommy Millott, the rookie from Montana State, a quarterback. I'll never forget on draft day, maybe 35 seconds after the Raiders drafted him, and at first it was quarterback, and it was like, okay, I knew they were gonna adjust quarterback, but that seemed odd. They later, went and got Cam Miller a few picks later. But I got a text from an NFL general manager who said the Raiders just took the favorite player in this draft, and he said and when he said favorite, it was like the most intriguing to him. Obviously he got drafted, but he was a guy that your scouting departments love, right? And literally the name that was texted to me, and I know that this is pretty lofty, and it almost seems a little bit lazy considering their backgrounds, but the Julian Edelman comp is something that a lot of people in the NFL bought into. Julian was a quarterback at Kent State. The Patriots drafted him and didn't quite know what to make of him, but they understood that he was dynamic with the ball in his hands, and they were going to figure out a way to get the ball in his hands. And if you look back his rookie year, on a team with guys like Wes Welker, I think was on that team, and Randy Moss was on that team, he still got 30 some odd catches or so and was pretty good on special teams. So Tommy Millott's going to have a real opportunity, whether it's in special teams to start off with, or as the year goes on, if he can make that transition to wide receiver from college quarterback at Montana State. Because I know this, the Raiders understand that this is a special player with the ball in his hands, and now it's on Chip Kelly and their staff to figure out ways to get the ball into his hands and figure out a way to be able to get him on the field in a way where he understands the position, he understands the assignment, and all that good stuff, to try to get something out of him offensively, even more so than just special teams this year.
No, that's awesome. We always love people like that to try and keep an eye on, to grow some excitement. That's someone, certainly I'm the second this ends, I'm going to grab a piece of paper and put him on my list, because that it's just fun that way. And it'll be cool to see if he can transition into something like that and be something dynamic for the Raiders. And, we've keep grazing the tight ends here and there. And I think we should finally jump into it there. Now, I went and again just kind of skipped over Bowers, but if there's anything you want to touch base with on Brock Bowers, please feel free.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think we both in our agreement that Michael Mayer is underutilized, undervalued, and I'm just curious what you think his potential, coming out party could look like this year, if at all, with Bowers and everything else we've discussed today. I'm just tight end room in general.
With Michael, if he could stay healthy and play all 17 games, I'm not going to put it past him for a 45 to 55 catch season, which, here's a guy that if he went to another team would be the number one tight end on a lot of different teams in this league. And the Raiders have a real luxury in having a player of this caliber as their second tight end. But it was pretty obvious during OTAs and minicamp that the Raiders were making it a priority to get him the ball. And, covering this team, and full disclosure, I'm a Notre Dame fan. So I saw every snap that Michael Mayer played from his freshman year through his junior year. And from day one, he was a difference maker. You needed 10 yards, throw it to Michael Mayer. You need a first down, throw it to Michael Mayer. You're in the red zone, throw it to Michael Mayer. Like you need a big play right now, a 50-yard gain, throw it to Michael Mayer and watch him, truck some people or run over some people. It just hasn't happened for him this year. And what was always perplexing to me was talking to whether it was Josh McDaniels initially or then the offensive coordinators that have come since, and head coaches that have come since. It was always consistently, man, need to do a better job getting Michael Mayer involved. Well, that's literally a coach's decision. It's your job to figure that out. It's your job to make that a priority and to make sure he gets the ball. So watching what happened in OTAs and minicamp and how many times they got him the ball and they threw it to him a lot. I can't not take something away from that. It feels like Chip Kelly understands and Pete Carroll understands. This is a weapon that it's high time that the Raiders tapped into. Now, the issue for Michael Mayer is he is playing with a Brock Bowers, and make no question, the passing game is going to be funneled through Brock Bowers, and why not? He's just a dynamic player, and but there's got to be a way, I think, especially with some young wide receivers too, that you're breaking in on this team. There's got to be a way to involve Michael Mayer more, and if they do and succeed in what felt like was a massive objective during the offseason, then I think that this Raiders tight end room is going to go from excellent already with Brock Bowers to really elite and one of the better tight end rooms, maybe the best tight end room in the NFL.
I mean, it almost feels like it should be, right? Like,
yeah.
You bring up a very good point where if Mayer was on other teams, he would have already been getting utilized more. He would have already been further ahead than he was. And I like to think that Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly could probably figure that out, or at least to your point, how to utilize this guy to help the Raiders win games.
Right. Right.
So we got all that. We got the wide receivers, I know there's a bunch of other stuff with the Raiders with this offense. What's something that you think, listeners need to know about this offense? And is that could be someone that you think is going to surprise people, that could be positive or negative, or just a general idea? What do we need to know about this Raiders offense that may not be overly obvious?
Well, I think what they need their offensive line to play better than they did last year. Now, you can make the argument that the run game, there were a lot of different factors that were playing into the run game. No, number one, nobody respected the Raiders passing game, so they loaded up against the run. But even when they didn't, there was difficulty running the ball. I think Zamir White probably was kind of misused, schematically. And there were some vision issues based on that. So, and I think the offensive line took a lot of blame for that. And, they definitely shouldered some of their blame, maybe not as much as it turned out to be, but they shouldered some of their blame. As the year went on, the offensive line got better. You mentioned Sincere McCormick. Why do you remember Sincere McCormick? Because he was actually running pretty well at one point, as opposed to what wasn't happening, before they inserted him. And by that time, they had changed offensive coordinators. They had changed offensive line coach. So, kind of set him up for some success. And he's a pretty good runner as well. But also the offensive line was playing better, especially how they were being used by Joe Philbin, who came in as the new offensive line coach. And he's still here. So I guess if there was one area that I would, urge Raider fans or fans to keep an eye on is the offensive line, because it does all start there. And another part of that offensive line is, if you go back this time last year, Colton Miller hadn't been cleared to resume practice or start football activities. He was coming off off-season shoulder surgery, and it cost him all of the spring, all of the summer. He didn't get back until like the last week of training camp, I think it was. So it was just very bare minimum. And it affected him the first month of the season. He didn't play good football the first month of the season. But from that point on, from week 5 on, he was Colton Miller. And if the Raiders can now get Colton Miller for 17 games rather than just the 13 games that they got him for last year, that makes a big difference. It'll help him get off to a better start, especially. And DJ Glaze and Jackson Powers Johnson, 2 rookies last year. DJ took over at right tackle, never missed a beat. Jackson Powers Johnson, another factor of that offensive line getting better, was the Raiders finally wised up and made him their starting center and never looked back. It was the right move, the right position for him, and he sets a tone. Both of those players, Glaze and Jackson Powers Johnson, being in their second year, I would expect that they're going to make big steps forward. And if that happens, then that offensive line again is going to be that much better. So keep an eye on the offensive line for sure.
No, that's awesome. I mean, especially, with Jeanty coming in, I mean, if you got a better O-line, it just should be fantasy goodness, right?
Yeah.
Well, Vinny, let's wrap it up here. I feel like you do a ton of stuff, so I want to make sure all our listeners learn about all that stuff. I mean, guys, I'm going to say this is the Raiders guy to follow. This is who we are trying to hone in on. I was ecstatic, and I told him this before this, that he was able to join the show because he does have such a great pulse on the Raiders. So, Vinny, go ahead, tell everyone what you're working on, where they can find your stuff, all the good stuff from you.
Yeah, first and foremost, the Las Vegas Review Journal. I cover the Raiders for the Review Journal. Very easy to find me at vegasnation.com. That's where you get all your Raider news, whether it's stories, columns, videos, podcasts, the whole 9 yards. It's basically your one-stop shop for Raider news and analysis. So vegasnation.com. I'm also the co-host of the Morning Tailgate Show with Raider Nation Radio. It's the official broadcast partner of the Raiders. So 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific time. You can catch us on here in Las Vegas, or it gets streamed live every day on Raiders.com. You can also catch the podcast version. We post it on all podcast platforms once the show is completed each day. So vegasnation.com and Raider Nation Radio.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Vinny, for joining us. Looking forward to the Raiders season. Excited to get into camp, and hopefully we can do this again next year, and we'll have a lot more to talk about with the Raiders.
Absolutely,
Awesome.
man. Enjoy training camp. Enjoy the season.
Thank you, everyone.